On January 2nd, 1944, 15-year-old Willie Howard experienced a sudden and heart-wrenching moment when 3 white men forcefully entered the house armed with guns and other weapons. It was really shocking for Lula Howard, his mother, who was alone at home and frightened about what was happening. She begged with all her heart to save her son, but the men heartlessly took Willie from their home. Even more shocking is that they took his dad, James, and brought them to the Suwannee River in a moment that painfully revealed the depths of his father's helplessness, when Willie looked at him who was crying and couldn't help but witness his son jumping into the river. All James could say to his son were these last words: "I cannot do anything for you now. I'm glad I have belonged to the church and prayed for you." So why did those men abduct Willie Howard? And what could Lula possibly do when the white men left the house? It all started in Suwannee County, Florida, back in 1858, when the people there, with a population of 44,485, decided to make it official and called it a charter day on December 21st, 1858. Later, they set up Live Oak in 1863, naming it after those giant oak trees giving travelers some cool shade. This place eventually became the county's main hub. Tucked away in the soil-rich panhandle, it was part of the Florida Black Belt, where farming was the real deal, cotton was the star, and lots of African-American farm workers were in demand. One such ordinary African-American man, Willie Howard, ended up caught in the crossfire of some seriously messed up racism. But who was Willie, and what went down with him? To figure that out, we need to dig into the nitty-gritty details of the events from the very start. When Willie James Howard, a 15-year-old boy, was born on July 13th, 1928 down in Suwannee County, Florida, he was the only son of James and Lula Howard, and they loved him the most. When Willie was little, he was a super smart, cheerful, and talented guy. He was a sophomore in Florida high school, and his friends knew him as the boy with some serious singing skills. Willie was the really happy, likable, and talented kid that anyone wants as a friend. He was all about staying clean, looking sharp, and being well-dressed. The boy was defined for his politeness. He showed respect to everyone, from his pals to the older folks. Plus, he had this heart of gold that made a bunch of girls in his community crush on him. A retired public school at the African-American school that Willie attended, La Francis Stevens, painted a picture of Willie as an extremely respectful and polite guy, a genuinely nice young man. According to her, if he spotted you approaching, he'd step aside with courtesy. Even though La Francis didn't get to teach him because she was all about teaching girls back then, she couldn't help but notice his cheerful spirit and melodic talents. Willie lived with his mother and father, and even though they both had jobs, it wasn't easy for them to buy fancy clothes and shoes for him. It also made them feel sad, as Willie loved dressing up and sometimes resorting to asking other people for clothes. Despite his parents working hard, getting those snazzy outfits for Willie was a bit of a challenge. For such a bright and widely loved boy, he and his parents lived humbly and peacefully. Now, because of his habit of dressing up and being a polite and respectful man in 1943, when he was just 15, he landed a seasonal job during the Christmas holidays. It was at Van Priest 5 and Dime Store in downtown Live Oak as a delivery boy, spreading holiday cheer with his deliveries. So back in the day, it was kind of a big deal for an African-American boy like Willie to score a job inside a store and do the deliveries. That spot wasn't exactly the go-to place for hiring African-American folks because of the not-so-friendly racist ideology floating around. Surprisingly, the store also had its share of Caucasian workers, and Willie was breaking the stereotype because he didn't look like the typical poor African-American person from his neighborhood or in the Deep South at the time. Now, at one point, when Willie was working at the store, he became really infatuated with a 17-year-old white girl who worked there by the name of Cynthia Goff. Willie, the quiet observer, used to watch Cynthia from afar, but never gathered the courage to talk to her. Now Willie, being his always nice self, decided to spread some holiday cheer. It was the festive season and everyone was in a joyful mood with family and friends. So Willie took a sweet initiative and sent Christmas cards to all the female co-workers at Van Priest store, wishing them health and happiness. So after spreading the joy with Christmas cards for everyone, Willie was on cloud 9, but his happiness didn't last long. Why? Well, it turned out that one of the store employees spilled the beans that Cynthia, the girl Willie had a crush on, was actually upset about getting a card from him. When Willie heard that Cynthia was upset, he got restless because he never wanted her to feel down. In an attempt to fix things, he decided to send her a personal letter. But little did he know, this well-intentioned move would turn out to be the biggest mistake of his life. In a letter he wrote, "Dear friend, just a few lines to let you hear from me. I am well and hope you are the same. This is what I said on that Christmas card. From WJH with L. I hope you'll understand what I mean. That is what I said now. Please don't get angry with me because you can never tell what may get in somebody. I did not put it in there myself. God did. I can't help what he does. Can I? I know you don't think much about our kind of people, but we don't hate you all. We want to be your friends, but you won't let us. Please don't let anybody see this. I hope I haven't made you mad. If I did, tell me about it and I'll forget about it. I wish this was a northern state. I guess you call me fresh. Write and tell me what you think of me, good or bad. Sincerely yours with L. From YKW to Cynthia Goff. I love your name. I love your voice. For SH, you are my choice." In the letter to Cynthia, Willie spilled his feelings, sounding like he was asking her to be friends. He wrote, "I know you don't think much of our kind of people, but we don't hate you. We want to be your friend." It's like he sensed that Cynthia might not be too keen on hanging out with people like him, but Willie was still hopeful. Even if Cynthia hadn't been the friendliest to people of his race, Willie, being the hopeful romantic, didn't want to give up on trying because he really liked her. So at 15, Willie had a pretty clear picture of what he wanted in life, and he understood every word he wrote in that letter. It also gives us a peek into Willie's mindset and a glimpse of how some people not just in his town, but all over the country were thinking during those times. But one thing Willie probably didn't know was that Cynthia's dad was Alex Goff, a respected former member of the Florida House of Representatives. Now, we're not sure if Cynthia told about the letter or if Mr. Goff found the letter himself. But on January 2nd, 1944, when he read Willie's letter that he gave to Cynthia, he got seriously angry. Mr. Goff wasn't exactly the hangout with any African-American kind of person. Imagine his shock when he found out that an African-American guy, Willie, had written a letter to his daughter. For Mr. Goff, this was like a total challenge to him and almost a crime in his eyes. So, being extremely furious, he rounded up his friends, Reginald H. Scott and Selden B. McCullers, and the three of them decided to pay Willie a visit at his house, supposedly to question him about the letter. But they weren't just armed with questions. They were also armed with guns and other weapons in tow. It seemed like their intentions might have been more than just normal questioning with Willie, but they were planning something more serious. As Mr. Goff and his friends were on their way, Willie, who was still busy with his work at the dime store, got some unsettling news. A fellow employee informed him that 3 white men were heading to his house looking for him. This news got Willie seriously scared, especially since he knew his mom, Lula, was home alone, and he knew what those men could really do. So, without wasting a moment, he rushed back home to ensure his mother's safety. As soon as Willie got home, he quickly started telling his mother about the letter and everything that happened and why these men were coming to their house. But before he could finish, at around 10 a.m., those 3 men stormed into his house and started to forcefully pull him away. When Lula saw what was happening, she did everything she could to protect Willie, pleading with them to let him go. She cried, begged, and tried to reason, but Mr. Goff seemed totally consumed by anger and was unwilling to listen to anything. That's when things took a terrifying turn when Mr. Goff pulled out a pistol and aimed it at Lula's head. He demanded that she hand over Willie to them. Being terrified and caught in an impossible situation, Lula reluctantly let the men take Willie away. As the cars drove off with her son, Lula ran after them, crying and screaming for them to let him go. But they didn't stop. Now, after seeing no other way desperately, she rushed to the lumber yard where her husband James worked in hopes to share the dreadful news of Willie's abduction. However, fate had different plans. Before she could even reach there, Mr. Goff and his 2 companions showed up with guns in hand and ordered James to get into the car with them. Now, by the time Lula reached the lumberyard, it was too late. Those men had already taken her son and husband, but there she met the lumberyard owner's wife, who spilled the details about everything that went down and how those 3 men took James with them. From there, The car drove out of town towards the Suwannee River, reaching a bluff in Sulphur Springs. Once they reached the high bank of the river, Mr. Goff had Willie and his father step out of the car. That's when he explained to James about everything Willie was accused of doing. James, even after knowing that his son was innocent and didn't do anything wrong, he felt utterly helpless in that heartbreaking moment. The three men tied up Willie's hands and feet, and he just stood there watching helplessly. Then Mr. Goff took on the roles of both judge and jury, and asked Willie James if he grasped the so-called penalty for his crime, which was just sending a letter to his daughter, Cynthia. According to Mr. Goff, Willie committed a crime, and he wanted to make an example out of him so that no one else would even think of doing the same in the future. Being terrified, Willie tearfully replied, "Yes, sir," as he faced this bizarre trial, weeping all the while. Mr. Goff turned to James and asked if he had any words for his son. Powerless to change the course of his son's fate, James just shared some comforting words, and what he realized were Willie's last moments. "Willie, I cannot do anything for you now. I'm glad I have belonged to the church and prayed for you." Both father and son had tears streaming down their faces. In a poignant final request, Willie asked his father to take his wallet. In a small yet significant exchange in the midst of this heart-wrenching ordeal. Then, without wasting a moment, Mr. Goff took out a gun and aimed it at Willie's head. He gave him a chilling ultimatum: either jump into the water or face what was in the gun. Remember, Willie's hands and feet were still bound. He was gagged and forced into an impossible decision, where he had no other choice but to jump into the water, and subjected himself to a horrific drowning death. Meanwhile, James, who was helpless, watched his son from a distance, ending his own life and meeting such a tragic end in front of his eyes. Even after doing this, the men seemed like they weren't satisfied. They took James back in the car and left him at the lumberyard, making sure he couldn't try to save his drowning son. Now, when James finished his work shift and returned home with a heavy heart, he had to deliver the devastating news to his wife, Lula. James sadly informed her that Willie wouldn't be coming home again. Even though Lula was somewhat prepared for the news, since she knew what the man had intended, but hearing it from James, she couldn't hold back her tears. It was a heartbreaking moment for the family. Now, if you think that's the end of the story, then hold on tight, because the story doesn't stop there. The white men went back to the Suwannee River, retrieved Willie's body and buried him, but they weren't done. They crafted their own version of events, and here's where it gets really interesting. Mr. Goff, being a representative with some serious power, headed straight to Tom Henry, the sheriff of Suwannee County, in 1944. There, the three men gave Sheriff Tom a written statement in which they shared their side of the story. According to them, they picked up Willie James from his house and brought him to his father James with the intention of having his father whip him over the letter. Further, they claimed that upon reaching the river, Willie actually resisted his father's attempt to discipline him. According to them, in his struggle to break free, Willie accidentally fell into the river and drowned himself. They insisted that they tried hard to rescue him while his father supposedly stood by, doing nothing. It was a strategic move on their part, telling their version of events in advance because they knew that the sheriff would believe them more than the Howard family. It was done to secure their innocence and avoid being suspected of Willie's death. But the question was, even if Sheriff Tom decided to buy into the story that Willie drowned himself, why didn't he slap them with a kidnapping charge? Even though they themselves had straight up admitted that they grabbed the boy from his house. Even back in Suwannee County in 1944, it was against the law to forcibly take a child from his mother. Yet, the white community seemed to swallow the story hook, line, and sinker. In their eyes, the African-American boy's demise was just a tragic accident. In reality, Willie was kidnapped, murdered, and buried within a mere 24 hours without leaving a proper grave marker. Sadly, Willie's case wasn't the only one, and he wasn't the only African-American boy to endure such cruelty. In August 1955, another tragic incident unfolded in Florida with Emmett Till, a 14-year-old African-American boy who faced lynching at the hands of 3 white men, all because he supposedly got physical with a white woman. Racism has been around for a long time, and unfortunately, it still exists in many parts of the world. Many cases of lynching have remained hidden which never came to light, and the stories often go unheard. Willie's case would have also been one of those cases, and no one would have ever known until one day fate took a turn. Albert C. Robinson, an African-American attorney from Live Oak, then in 1944 living in Washington, D.C., came home for the holidays. There he heard from the owner of the lumberyard about an African-American child being lynched, and he was so disturbed by this injustice that just 2 days after Willie's murder on January 4, 1944, Robinson wrote a letter to the NAACP in Washington, D.C. Little did he know that this letter would set in motion the involvement of Thurgood Marshall, who in 1944 became the first African-American person to serve on the United States Supreme Court, ensuring Willie's story wouldn't be buried in silence. The letter dated January 4, 1944 stated, "While visiting in Florida during the Christmas holidays, one of the most gruesome cases imaginable was called to my attention. The people who relayed the facts in this case to me asked that I withhold their names, but implored me to get the facts in this case through to the NAACP as soon as possible. It appears that the conditions there are so tense that the colored people, high and low, are so frightened that they are afraid to have their names identified with cases of this type." After reading that impactful letter, Attorney Robinson not only shared the names of those he'd spoken to, Willie's father, James Howard, the African-American undertaker, Ansel Brown, Reverend R.M. Lane of Live Oak, and Mr. McPherson, the principal of Willie's school, but he also made a request to not publicize these names. Attorney Robinson's intervention actually sparked action into Willie's case. The NAACP sent letters to Florida Governor Holland urging an investigation into Willie's killing. This move marked the first step toward justice for Willie. The governor also appointed Special Investigator David Laney from Florida Law Enforcement Agency and instructed him to provide a discreet report on the matter. The wheels of justice started turning, albeit quietly. Investigator Laney wasted no time and went straight to the heart of the matter, interviewing those involved in Willie's case. His interviews included Sheriff Tom, the 3 men implicated in Willie's death, James and Luna Howard. However, Luna and her account to the special investigator painted a vivid picture. On January 2, 1944, James had left for work at Bond Howell Lumber Company, where Mr. R.L. Howard was his boss. Later that morning, an automobile carrying 3 white men pulled up to my house. From that, 2 white men stood at the gate, in which one was named Mr. McCullough, and the identity of the other man remained unknown to me. The third man was Mr. Phil Goff. Suddenly, Willie walked into the house and Mr. Goff seized him, insisting him to come along. I frantically tried to pull Willie away, begging and asking what he had done. In the midst of this, Mr. Goff produced a revolver, pointing it at me. He forcibly dragged Willie to the car, joined by the other white men, and sped off towards Live Oak. I chased after the car, but it quickly got away from me. Once the interviews were done, Investigator Lanier was convinced that the 3 men were responsible for Willie's tragic end. In his report to the governor, David Lanier straightforwardly stated that the men were guilty of murder if they were guilty of anything. In response, on February 14, 1944, Governor Holland wrote to Thurgood Marshall, attaching a copy of Lanier's report. However, the governor also cautioned Marshall about the challenges ahead, emphasizing the difficulties when the testimony of 3 white men and the girl would likely stand against the account of 1 African-American man. Despite having all the information, fighting for this case remained an uphill battle. The pursuit of justice for Willie took an unexpected turn at the Shawnee Courthouse on May 4, 1944. The state's attorney brought the Howard killing before a grand jury, but things didn't unfold as anticipated. In a surprising twist, the only witness summoned was James Howard, who had relocated to Orlando by then. The grand jury just had 2 questions for him. How old was the boy? Did he personally deliver the letter to Cynthia Goff? Strangely, there were no inquiries about what transpired at the river. Lula Howard and other potential corroborating witnesses were not called. Even the special investigator, Laney, was left out. After responding to the 2 questions, James Howard was dismissed from the grand jury proceedings and was left in the dark about any further developments. But why weren't there any questions about those white men? Why weren't there any questions about how Willie died? Why wasn't it important for the state's attorney? In a final push for justice, Harry T. Moore, the head of the state NAACP and a childhood classmate of Willie Howard, made a valiant effort. Moore conducted his own investigation. He gathered affidavits from the Howard family. He organized an NAACP chapter in Live Oak using the Howard lynching as his rallying cry. Hailing from the same settlement outside Live Oak called Houston, Moore felt a personal connection to Willie's case. He teamed up with Marshall and they both aimed to involve the federal authorities. But despite the compelling arguments presented by Marshall and Moore, the state chose to remain silent, which only added another chapter to the sadly familiar narrative of justice eluding those who needed most. Following the lynching, Willie James' parents promptly relocated to Orlando, where James Howard passed away a few years later and Lula Howard lived until 2004. Mamie, Lula's sister, shared in a 2006 interview in Orlando that Lula's heart remained broken throughout her life. Willie was her only child and had left an indelible mark on her, a wound that time couldn't fully heal. Even after decades, some Caucasian individuals in Live Oak continued to cling to the drowning myth. In an interview on October 19, 2006, Susan K. Lamb, the editor of the Sewanee Democrat, the town's newspaper, adamantly stated, "It was not a lynching, it was a drowning." According to her, the boy was supposedly running away and met his demise in the river. When questioned about the practicality of running with bound hands and feet, her response was simply, "Isn't that interesting?" Willie James Howard was laid to rest in Live Oak's Eastside Cemetery, resting in anonymity for over 60 years with no marker on his grave. It was finally in 2005 when Douglas Udall, a Sewanee County commissioner and mortician, took the initiative. Having acquired the funeral home and records from Ansel Brown, who'd handled Willie James' burial, Commissioner Udall funded and arranged for a long overdue grave marker. Additionally, he organized a church service to honor Willie James, a poignant tribute that had been absent at the time of his tragic death. Now, Douglas Udall stands as a testament to the evolving landscape of African-American political influence in Sewanee County, once among Florida's most conservative regions. Despite a district with a majority of white voters, Udall was elected chairman of the Sewanee County Commission in November 2007, showcasing a shift in the county's political dynamics. Also in 2006, Sewanee County Sheriff Tony Cameron demonstrated a rare commitment by attending the memorial service for Willie James, one of the few Caucasian people to do so. His presence spoke volumes, saying, "I thought I should be there." Sheriff Cameron's assistance extended to aiding Douglas Udall's research efforts. He reached out to Cynthia Goff's best friend from his office, revealing that Cynthia, although no longer residing in Live Oak, occasionally visits there. The friend shared that Cynthia was deeply distressed by Willie James' tragic fate, expressing, "She did not intend for that to happen. I think it stayed with her all of her life." Cynthia never married and spent her life working in downtown stores, including the Van Priest-Time store. This incident had a profound impact on everyone involved and disrupted their lives permanently. During that period, racism deeply influenced society and created a stark division between African American and Caucasian people. Caucasians were often considered superior, while African Americans faced unjust perceptions of inferiority. Over time, society has evolved, and today, people from all backgrounds are treated with equal respect and offered opportunities regardless of their race. Presently, individuals of all races, including white people, embrace diversity and easily interact with one another. Yet some lingering perceptions suggest that Willie may have believed he could navigate a racially biased world, relying on charm, style, singing talent, and an unconventional job choice. The complexities of his motivations during those times continue to fuel discussions. It's hard to definitively say why Willie wrote the Letters of Cynthia. Some might argue he wrote it out of pride in himself, believing he could break social barriers. On the other hand, it's also possible that Willie genuinely had feelings for Cynthia, hoping to build a connection despite the racial challenges of the time. The complexities of human emotions make it challenging to pinpoint a single motivation behind Willie's actions. The situation raised many questions about the role of fear, power dynamics, and societal pressures during those challenging times. On December 5, 2001, 20-year-old Wesley Powell was sitting inside his vehicle at a Oaxaca gas station in Birmingham, Alabama. An unknown man then walked up to Wesley's car, stood inside the open passenger door, and shot Wesley a few times. Sadly, he succumbed to his injuries the next day in a hospital. The man fled on foot. Witnesses were able to tell the police that the culprit is a young black male, but unfortunately, no one recognized him and there was nothing else for the investigators to go on. Then, in early 2022, investigators received valuable information regarding the case. It led them to 46-year-old Ricky Witherspoon. Investigators were able to confirm that he was responsible. Witherspoon was arrested on August 19, 2022. He is currently being held at a Jefferson County jail without bond. During the news conference held by Birmingham Police Department to address the arrest, some family members of Wesley's attended and made a brief statement. "Don't give up, because at one time I really did. After 21 years, I did. To see this come to light and give our family some closure, so we can have Christmas dinner like everybody else. Because everybody else was having Christmas dinner and we were burying our son. But the main thing is, don't give up," said Wesley Powell Jr. 26-year-old Anna Kain lived in Reading, Pennsylvania in 1988. She was a sex worker and drug user. Anna had 3 children. On October 23, 1988, Anna's body was found in a wooded area near Reading with baling twined around her neck. An investigation revealed that she had been strangled elsewhere and dumped in the woods. In February of 1990, about 15 months after Anna's life was taken, a local newspaper, the Reading Eagle, received an anonymous letter from a concerned citizen with information that only the perpetrator would know. The letter writer also left his DNA when he licked the envelope. Investigators analyzed Anna's clothing and found traces of an unknown male's DNA. The Pennsylvania State Police have declined to release the 1990 letter to the newspaper or to elaborate on exactly what it said. There were just intimate details about where she was disposed of, how her clothes were displayed, stuff like that, State Police Trooper Daniel Wummer said. This led investigators to believe that whoever wrote the letter had committed the crime. They later determined that the male DNA on Anna's clothing matched the DNA on the envelope from 1990, confirming investigators' belief that the person behind the letter was the perpetrator. But while the investigators had his DNA profile, there was nothing to identify him, because he had never been arrested for anything that required his DNA to be put into the system. That's where genetic genealogy came in. Genetic genealogy's effectiveness in cold cases depends on the quality of crime scene DNA and whether it has degraded. The detectives' careful preservation of DNA evidence in 1988 provided a solid foundation for today's investigators to examine with new technology. Genetic genealogy combines DNA evidence and traditional genealogy to find biological connections among people. In recent years, companies like 23andMe and Ancestry.com have encouraged people to explore their genealogy by spinning into a tube and sending it off for analysis. These companies then send back information on their clients' ethnic heritage, genetic health risk, and family tree, as well as a raw data file on their DNA. With millions of users seeking to explore their genetic roots, the practice has become a big business. It is also a valuable tool for law enforcement officers to solve old crimes. DNA collected from crime scenes can now be uploaded to an online service that compares it to DNA submitted by people using companies like 23andMe to explore their genealogy. If a possible match is found, genealogists can build out family trees to help find potential suspects. Finally, in August 2022, Pennsylvania State Police used genetic genealogy testing to identify the man responsible for taking the life of Anna Kain. Pennsylvania State Police Nathan Trate said, "All of that stuff was preserved the way it should be because they knew probably somewhere down the line whatever they collected could be that little piece of evidence to solve the case." Well, here we are in 2022, and that little piece of evidence that they collected was exactly what we needed. The person responsible is a local man named Scott Grimm. Grimm passed away in 2018 at age 58. Investigators don't know much about him other than he lived in a nearby Hamburg, Pennsylvania area. Investigators are trying to determine whether he knew Anna, and have urged anyone who knows the nature of their relationship to reach out. So far, they have found no ties. Anna's daughter, 43-year-old Tamika Reyes, spoke during the press conference. She was just 9 years old when her mother was taken away from her. I felt a bit of everything when I found out. I was happy to finally put a face behind the monster who took her from us and upset that he will never be able to face consequences. Tamika said one of her fondest childhood memories was taking walks with her mother and seeing her suddenly dance to random music playing in stores as they passed. She was a firecracker, very outgoing, not afraid of anything, very honest, blunt and caring. Tamika says she's still bothered by the image the media painted of her mother. Although she had a dark past that included drug use and prostitution, she was trying to turn her life around, Tamika said. She was portrayed as this slain prostitute, like she deserved what happened to her. It was hurtful. She was more than that. She was a victim. She was a mother. She was loved. No one deserves what happened to her. It has been hard growing up without a mom, she said. No child should ever have to grow up without their mom. Tamika still has so many questions she would ask Grimm if he was still alive. Why did he take the life of a young woman who was just trying to take care of her children? And what went through his mind when he learned she had a family that loved her? Tamika knows she'll never get the answers, but she's glad her family finally knows who did it. Now the investigators have identified Scott Grimm. They will review other open cold cases to see if he was involved. A small town in Kipling, Saskatchewan looked forward to a little spooky fun on Halloween night in 1992. But Candice Fonagy had no idea that the horrors that night would go far beyond her wildest expectations. First of all, she recently discovered that her partner was unfaithful to her. Then, she was unable to locate her friend when she went to see her at a nearby hospital. Candice was starting to feel nervous. Candice allowed Dr. John, the only physician in the community, to give her an injection as she sought solace from him. However, she soon sensed that she was being stripped and assaulted. She called the police and reported everyone's favorite doctor, Dr. John. No one, not even the police, took her allegations seriously because he denied doing anything of that kind. For years afterward, the entire community was plagued by suspicion about who was telling the truth, Candice or Dr. John. Then, after a grueling 5 years, a fresh perspective emerged, completely altering the narrative. Kipling, Saskatchewan, a charming town in rural Canada, is steeped in history. Its name honors the renowned writer Rudyard Kipling. Kipling grew from a tiny settlement in the early 1900s to a quaint town with about 1,000 residents. The town's architecture features wide streets and low-rise buildings, with a school and library at its center. There are a few restaurants, a co-op, a small cafe, farming supply stores, and more. Kipling is proud to be the center of the community's medical and educational resources. Kipling's close-knit community is comparable to a large family. The town comes alive with celebrations during the holidays. On Halloween, children dress up and roam the streets in search of candy. The chilly air is filled with a charming and celebratory atmosphere. However, for 23-year-old Candice Fonagy, a Kipling resident, Halloween 1992 changed her entire life. Candice Fonagy was working at a gas station on October 31st, 1992, just like any other day. However, this particular day proved to be unique. When Danny, her boyfriend, showed up, they got into a heated fight because Danny had done something that had truly irritated Candice. Candice had had enough of his lies and was shocked to learn that he had asked another girl out to dinner. Out of rage, she punched Danny's truck, causing a dent. Candice was left furious as Danny walked off. She was so upset that she left work and went to see a friend at the Kipling Memorial Union Hospital to unwind. But things did not go as planned. Candice arrived at the Kipling Memorial Union Hospital, hoping to find her friend, but she was not present. Candice was still upset and struggling to calm down. Candice accepted the nurse's suggestion to speak with a doctor after realizing she needed assistance to calm her emotions. That evening, Dr. John Schneberger was in charge. John Schneberger was born in Zambia on January 1st, 1961, into a family that valued education. He was a student at the prestigious Kearsney College in South Africa, where he was a standout student and made lots of friends. It came as no surprise when he enrolled in medical school following in his brother's footsteps. He left Kiersney behind to pursue his studies at the University of Stellenbosch, which is located close to Cape Town. He demonstrated his excellence as a student, particularly in anesthesiology, by graduating in December of 1984. John Schneberger relocated to Kipling, which is south of Saskatchewan, in the year 1987. He officially joined the medical staff at Kipling Medical Center in December 1988, having completed the requirements to become a physician in Canada. Before long, the talk of the town was all about the handsome new doctor with the distinctive accent. In the entire region, he was one of only 2 physicians. He quickly gained the reputation of Dr. John. His initials served as his emblem. He became very popular with the locals, who saw him as a compassionate physician in this small, close-knit community. He was popular with everyone, especially the women, thanks to his polished and easygoing demeanor. He revealed that his female patients were sometimes so enamored with him that they would pretend to be ill in order to see him. He was attractive, tall, and endearing. He was the most eligible bachelor in the town. He met Lisa Dillman, a single mother of 2 children, at his doctor's office. They tied the knot in 1991. He treated Lisa's kids as if they were his own, encouraging them to participate in sports. The couple was again blessed with 2 daughters, born barely a year apart. Not only was Dr. John skilled in general medicine, but he also recognized that the town needed more specialized care. As a full-time physician and father of 4, he continued his education until 1992, when he became an expert in obstetrics and gynecology at the age of 38. In addition to all of this, he was spearheading an effort to raise funds for a new pool that the town would be able to use. At the high school, he also taught a special class on relationships and related topics. For Dr. John, everything was going well, but soon things would change. Dr. John was well known to Candace because, just 9 months prior, he had assisted her in giving birth. She confided in him about her altercation with Danny and her concerns regarding her outburst. Dr. John had witnessed an argument between Candace and Danny during a fundraiser for the Naperville swimming pool. He was aware of Candace's fiery side, and this time she was unable to control her emotions. Dr. John briefly left the room and came back with a small syringe in his hand. Candace was a little taken aback because she had assumed she would be given medication, but the doctor clarified that a shot would be more appropriate given her circumstances. Candace offered her right arm for the shot because she trusted him. Her body felt heavy, as if she were asleep as soon as the medication was injected, and she was barely able to move. She moved from the chair to the exam bed with Dr. John's assistance, lying on her left side with her back to the wall. For Candace, it was an odd sensation. Versed, a type of sedative, is the medication that Dr. John used. It is typically utilized when patients must endure uncomfortable procedures like a colonoscopy. Normally, it puts patients to sleep and causes them to forget what happened during the procedure. But as you can see, every person is unique, and Candace was only immobilized, not unconscious or asleep. She could not react when she felt someone tuck her jeans down and move her underwear to the side while she was dazed. Then the dependable physician did the unimaginable to her. Candace wanted to scream, but all she managed to produce was a weak, raspy noise. She did not see anyone's face during this terrible moment, but Dr. John was the only person in the room with her. When it was all over, the doctor adjusted her pants and underwear. He went out of the room, sipping up his own pants. Because of the powerful medication, Candace was completely disoriented and unable to act. When a nurse checked on Candace, she was too exhausted and lightheaded to drive home, so the nurse recommended that Candace stay the night. Keeping the incident from the nurse, Candace went to bed feeling very disoriented. Because of the medication, Dr. John probably thought she would not remember anything, but that was not the case. Candace's head felt foggy the next morning, and for a brief while, she was not quite sure what had happened. How could Dr. John, who was usually so kind, do something so horrible? Her doubt, however, was short-lived that she immediately recalled every detail of what had transpired. Before she could leave the hospital, she had to wait for the doctor to finish his morning rounds. Upon seeing him at last, She inquired about the medication he had administered to her. He asked her why she wanted to know and if it had given her crazy dreams while remaining composed at the time. Although she was traumatized and still experiencing the side effects of the powerful medication, Candace was able to maintain focus even though she knew he would never admit to what he had done to her. If she ever wanted to prove the doctor's guilt, what she did next was vital. When she removed her panties, she noticed a stain. She hurriedly placed her panties in a plastic bag and closed it, realizing that this might be her only piece of evidence. Candace realized she had to get the word out to someone as soon as possible about what had occurred. However, she did not feel comfortable reporting it in Kipling, where she was raised, because she knew the doctor had connections to the local police department. Rather, she made the decision to travel 2 hours by car to Regina. She visited a clinic there so that the appropriate tests could be performed. The material on Candace's underwear was unquestionably bodily fluid, as the test revealed. Additionally, some was discovered in swabs taken from her private area and on her jeans. The Regina police were alerted by the hospital right away, and Candace informed them of the incident. She clarified that the bodily fluid they discovered could only have come from the attacker, Dr. John Schneberger, because she had not engaged in any sexual activity in the weeks prior to the incident. DNA was a novel concept in science back in the early 1990s, 3 years before Candace's ordeal in 1989. Evidence was used for the first time in Canada to apprehend a criminal. She was very wise to go to the clinic straight away and get the test done, since they could use the bodily fluid's DNA to see if it matched the doctor's. After learning about the situation, the Kipling police visited the hospital to conduct their own investigation. They started attempting to determine when the attack might have occurred. They discovered that there was a 20-minute window during which Dr. John could have carried out the attack. There was only one other man in the hospital that night, and he never left his wife alone while she was giving birth. After that, the police went to Dr. John's residence to question him regarding the incident. He was furious and claimed that on Halloween night, Candace was acting strangely when she arrived at the hospital. He claimed to have given her medication to help her relax. According to him, Candace may have confused things or possibly dreamed about the assault while under the influence of the medication. He hinted that she might have made these accusations to coerce him, but he provided a sample of his blood for DNA testing to demonstrate his innocence. For Candace, the lengthy DNA testing process seemed to go on forever. Around this period, rumors concerning Candace's assertions had begun to circulate in Kipling, a tiny town. She was not well believed by many. Some began to wonder if the assault actually occurred because Candace chose not to speak with the nurses who were on duty the night of the attack. There was a theory that Candace may have kept the evidence to force the doctor to pay her to drop the charges, even though Candace and the doctor may have had consensual sexual relations. She was held accountable for the events by some individuals. At this time, Candace felt incredibly isolated. Dr. John, on the other hand, was well received. He was well liked by the general public and had never been involved in any scandals. When he revealed what Candace had said to his wife, Lisa, she was convinced of his innocence. Lisa found it hard to accept that the father of her children and her devoted spouse could be cruel to anyone. She thought that Candace might have been having feelings for her husband and was hurting him by expressing these thoughts because he was not feeling the same way about her. She disliked Candace and was enraged that she was attempting to harm the family name and the reputation of her husband. By this point, Candace had received the results of the DNA test, and to her dismay, neither the DNA nor the bodily fluid discovered on her underwear matched the blood sample from Dr. John Schneberger. It was decided that he was innocent. He was happy to move on and freely expressed his relief to his friends and co-workers. So was it really a dream? And even if it was, how would one account for the stains on her panties? Still, the town did not need an explanation. Many believed that Candace had falsely accused the reputable physician, and as a result, she lost a number of friends. Even though they struggled, Candace's parents never wavered in their belief in her. Regardless of the DNA result, Candace was adamant that Dr. John had attacked her on Halloween and was not willing to back down. She insisted on a second test because she was positive that Dr. John, a specialist in medicine, had altered his blood sample in some way to produce different results. Police had to admit that they did not witness the initial blood test, which was required by law, acknowledging Candace's tenacity that went up to Dr. John to request another blood sample. Despite being incensed and insulted by the request, he reluctantly complied. He was aware that his reputation and career could be damaged by these charges. His wife Lisa was by his side the entire time, giving him unwavering support. Dr. John visited a lab in August 1993 to give another blood sample. 2 law enforcement officials were there to supervise the procedure this time. After the doctor rolled up his left sleeve, the lab technician started using a needle to take blood. But Dr. John stepped in, grabbed the technician's needle, and completed the task himself. An RCMP officer was standing close by, watching intently. To be extra thorough, Dr. John filled a second vial of blood after filling the first one. In response to the officer's questioning, Dr. John said that the prior blood draw had damaged a tendon, which was the reason for the bruises on his upper arm. The officer was satisfied because the explanations made sense. The blood files were then taken by the officers for analysis. Candace continued to endure the resentful glances from Kipling residents for 6 more months. She persisted in believing that she was correct and that the test results would eventually support her belief despite the obstacles. Nevertheless, her expectations were not met by reality. The results of the second test showed that, once more, the DNA profile of the fluid found in Candace's underwear did not match the blood sample from Dr. John. In 1994, the case against Dr. John Schneberger was concluded. The DNA evidence appeared to confirm the opposite of what Candace instinctively felt to be true once more. Lisa Schneberger was particularly vocal, implying that Candace was looking for financial gain from the situation. It turned into a case of a young mother on her own against a highly respected physician, who was also a father of 4 and well-liked in the community. In Kipling, the criticism directed at Candace was tremendous. She knew it was time to go because she felt alienated in her hometown. She moved to Regina with her daughter, saying goodbye to the town. Life carried on in Kipling's usual manner. The Schneberger family continued their journey, putting the past behind them. In a week following the release of the results of the second DNA test, Dr. John Schneberger, who retained his South African residency rights, became a citizen of Canada. But the idea that Dr. John had gotten away with it haunted Candace, and she refused to let go. And Candace was afraid he would hurt someone else. She decided to take matters into her own hands because she was determined to find out. She hired a private investigator with the support of her attorney. After retiring from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Larry O'Brien, who had 25 years of experience, began his career as a private investigator. His impression of Candace's honesty was cemented after their first conversation. He agreed with her suspicion that Dr. John's DNA tests were not quite right. They had to come up with another method of proving his guilt, another way to get his DNA. O'Brien made a pretty smart first attempt. He sent an assistant to visit Dr. John Schneberger's residence while posing as a representative of a nearby radio station. The doctor was tricked by the assistant into entering a fictitious contest and placing his entry in an envelope. John handed the envelope back after sealing it. Though this plan failed, it might have yielded the DNA that would validate Candace's story. Later on, O'Brien clarified that there was a problem with the envelope. Despite being chosen at random from a fresh box, it became contaminated in some way which was not supposed to happen. It was uncommon to have secrets in a small town like Kipling. They were aware of one another's business. The cleaning lady from Schneberger's knew the Hajes, and she told Lisa that the Hajes had a private investigator. Lisa was enraged to find that Candace had not given up because she thought the unpleasant situation was over. The Kipling Medical Center sent a letter to Candace's family within a week telling them they were no longer welcome. In a town with just 2 doctors, this was a serious problem. They would have to get medical attention outside of Kipling if they got sick. Larry O'Brien followed Dr. in his car on Saturday, March 23, 1996, while he waited for him to park. The first initial of the doctor's last name, Schnee, was personalized on the license plate of his car. This was without a doubt the vehicle belonging to the man Candace thought had abused her. As soon as Dr. John was out of sight, the private investigator attempted to open the driver's door, which, like most cars in Kipling, was unlocked. He knew precisely what he was looking for. He looked in the ashtray and found a used chapstick. He also found hair strands on the headrest of the driver's seat. Although it appeared brand new, he discovered the edge was worn when he opened it. It had already been put to use. He sealed it in a forensic bag after rubbing it on the envelope's window section. Candace paid for DNA testing at a separate lab by using a loan from her parents. The hair samples could not be tested because they lacked roots. On the chapstick, though, was some residual saliva. When the results were received after 2 weeks, they did not match the blood sample that Dr. John had provided. But the tale had one more twist. The stain discovered in Candace's assault kit and the DNA on Dr. John's chapstick matched. It was finally verified that Dr. John Schneberger was, in fact, the person who had attacked Candace as she had always believed. Although it took her 4 years to prove this, the war was far from over. The significant obstacles stood in their way, notwithstanding the chapstick's evidence. They could not demonstrate that John was the only chapstick user, and the fact that the private investigator had obtained evidence by breaking into this car without authorization meant that it would not be accepted in court. They gave the police access to the evidence, but they were limited in what they could do. Nevertheless, the cops were persuaded by the evidence that Candace was telling the truth. They only needed to find a different way to prove Dr. John's guilt, because they were positive he was guilty. With the evidence that Candace's private investigator had uncovered, the officers came up to John and requested a third blood sample. In November of 1996, Dr. John had additional blood drawn. This time, the entire procedure was recorded by the police. The doctor refused to allow the nurse to prick his finger, stating that he had a medical condition that would cause severe bruises if blood were extracted from his hands. He held out his arm and complied. They could not make him do anything against his will without a court order. The nurse's expression of surprise can be heard during the testing procedure in the video recording. Nothing looked particularly fresh about the blood she had just taken from the doctor's left arm. It appeared to be ancient due to its dark brown color. After examining the sample, the technicians determined that it was of inadequate quality, which precluded carrying out appropriate testing. Candace was incensed. If the blood seemed strange, why had they accepted it? When the doctor was still at the lab, why did not they insist on another sample? She had gone a long way in demonstrating that Dr. John was not who he claimed to be, and she had no intention of giving up just yet. In a desperate attempt, Candace bravely decided to sue the doctor in civil court. She also informed the nearby medical society about his behavior. It was evident throughout the court proceedings that the majority of people supported Dr. John. Lisa, his wife, was incensed that Candace had implicated her husband in such a heinous act and was not inclined to accept the possibility that it was true. She even used derogatory language to characterize Candace during a local TV station interview. Sadly, the civil lawsuit never proceeded, and Candace was forced to accept the possibility that Dr. John might get away with his misdeeds. But things were about to turn around. Lisa Schneberger learned of something going on within her own family's home on April 25, 1997. Her 15-year-old daughter from her first marriage informed her that something strange had been going on. During the night, her stepfather came to her room and gave her an injection. When she awoke, she found the condom wrapper in her bed. She showed her mother by bringing her to her bedroom. When Lisa asked her daughter if it had happened before, she replied that it was not the first time. Lisa recalled inquiring once about giving her daughter an injection, to which her husband acknowledged having done so and explained that the girl had been coughing and he was just trying to help her. Lisa had never heard any coughing, but she did not think twice about it because he was the doctor. Lisa discovered that when her daughter was just 13 years old, 2 years prior, John had begun abusing her. Lisa questioned her daughter about why she had not spoken up earlier, and she gave an explanation of her reasoning. If her mother did not believe Candace, why would she believe her? She could never have imagined, even in her most romantic fantasies, that the devoted father and stepfather she loved so much was actually a predator. Lisa discovered sedatives, including Versed, condoms, and syringes concealed on a high shelf in her husband's home office. It was a major step when Lisa asked John to leave their house and told the police everything. When Candace learned the news, she was shocked. After spending years battling for justice and fearing that John might harm someone else, learning that he had preyed on his own stepdaughter was undoubtedly bad news. Candace said that day she found out would always be in her memory. John was again sampled by the police. This time it is hair, saliva, and blood. They collected the blood from his finger. Upon receiving the test results, it was verified that Dr. John's DNA corresponded with both the DNA discovered in Candace's underwear and the DNA from the chapstick that was discovered in his vehicle. Following his arrest, John was charged with assaulting both his stepdaughter and Candace Fonagy. Despite Dr. John's best efforts to persuade Lisa of his innocence and his desire for her support, Lisa happily decided to believe her daughter and rejected his attempts to change her mind. Lisa was left alone to raise her 4 children, the youngest of whom was only 13 months old. To pay off the mortgage, she had to sell the family vehicle. In Red Deer, Alberta, she was able to secure employment at the Diabetes Association. This gave her the opportunity to start over in a new location and provide for her family. The trial of Dr. John Schneberger started in 1999. He continued to refute the accusations during the trial. He was under the impression that Candace had broken into his home, removed the used condom from the basement trash, and used the bubbly fluid to fabricate accusations. He asserted that she intended to set him up for financial gain in blackmail. As soon as he realized what was going on, he acted decisively to defend his family, his reputation in the community, and himself. He meant manipulation of evidence when he mentioned strong actions. Even after he confessed, no one knew how he did it. The eagerly anticipated moment soon arrived. It was demanded of Dr. John an explanation of how he altered the DNA evidence. The public was profoundly affected by the genuinely shocking events that transpired during this crime. But when his desperate plan was eventually revealed, the real surprise was still to come. Dr. John had surgically placed a tube, a 15 centimeters Penrose drain filled with the blood of another man, into his arm next to his actual vein, following the initial request for a blood sample in 1992. Also, he had added anticoagulants to maintain the blood's fluidity. He set things up so that the technician drew blood from the tube, rather than his real vein when he was brought to the police lab for testing. He took out the tube following the test. He went through this again for the second test 9 months later. He put the tube back in April 1996, after finding out that Candace had hired an investigator. This could clarify why the nurse believed the blood to be aged. It belonged to Danny Sabo, one of his male patients, and it was, in fact, as old as 7 months. After watching the video, investigators saw how Dr. John had manipulated the situation. He consistently extended his left arm and rolled up his sleeve just above the elbow, concealing the scar from where he had cut himself to insert the tube. There is a brief moment in the video where you can see the elevated skin in the shape of a tube. In the spotlight, as the main witness was Candace, her voice was finally acknowledged and heard after all these years. The defense tried to portray her as a money lover and a deceiver, but she refused to accept that. As resolute as ever, she stressed that she had no hidden agenda for searching for the doctor's truth all those years. The defense argued that the sedative Candace had taken had clouded her memory of the crime. "We will drug you unversed and you can explain to us how it feels," Candace said to John's attorney. Took 7 years before Dr. John Schneberger was found guilty of assault, administering a noxious substance and obstructing justice. For these offenses, he received a 6-year prison sentence. He was very fortunate to have escaped the usual life sentence that was the maximum punishment for these offenses. Furthermore, there was not enough proof to convict him of assaulting a stepdaughter, so the case was dismissed. Candace Fonagy felt vindicated, nevertheless. "This is a glorious day that I have waited for 7 years," the woman remarked following the trial. "I hope he rusts because that is exactly what he deserves for all the hurt he caused." The College of Physicians and Surgeons of Saskatchewan revoked his medical license because of his misuse of a position of trust. Lisa Schneberger submitted a divorce petition. Dr. John insisted on keeping his parental rights even after receiving his sentence, and Lisa was compelled to take their daughters to see him in jail on the last Sunday of each month. They were also required to call them on Mondays for an hour-long talk. The girls would frequently hide behind their mother in tears when they visited him in prison. They avoided being close to or conversing with their father out of fear. He had broken their family and hurt their sister. Because the meeting was too upsetting for the young girls, who were 5 and 6 years old, the social worker stepped in and ended it. Even John acknowledged that this was an inappropriate method for his daughters to meet with him, and that Lisa did not need to bring them back. Lisa told immigration authorities that he had lied on his citizenship application, and that there was no investigation against him because she was worried he would be released from prison in 6 years and inflict more harm on the family. After that, he was deported to South Africa, where he was granted permanent residency. He moved to live with his mother in Durham after running out of options. He worked as a caterer for a while before turning to religion after being denied his medical license. In recent years, John joined the Durham Wine Academy, which is affiliated with the Cape Wine Academy, and received approval to lead wine tasting courses and provide sommelier training. In addition to working as a care assistant in a Saskatchewan addiction services facility, Candice Fonagy found happiness in marriage. Regarding Lisa Dillman, she is still of the opinion that her ex-husband has no regrets. Despite the complete upheaval in her life, she concentrated on raising her daughters. "At least I can tell my girls when they are older I try," she remarked. "They will be aware that their mother made an effort to keep them away from him." 22-year-old Heather Hajes lived in Rocky Mountain, Virginia in 2012. She was a college student and just recently became a mother. Heather dated Paul Revens Jordan. Jordan reported Heather missing on April 11, 2012. This was 2 days after she had last been seen by her family members. Jordan claimed to get Heather a blizzard at a nearby Dairy Queen around 10:30 p.m. on April 9th, but she was gone when he got home. Her sister had dropped her off at the couple's house around 6:30 a.m. that day after Heather had spent a few days staying with her family. Jordan immediately became a person of interest in Heather's disappearance. He had been arrested on April 5, 2012, less than a week before Heather disappeared, on misdemeanor charges for an attack on Paula Hajes, Heather's mother. Jordan had thrown a chair and metal toys at her before chasing her out of the couple's home with a baseball bat. Jordan was ultimately convicted in that case in July of 2012, given a 1-year suspended sentence. He had also been previously convicted in 2007 of contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Jordan was arrested in an unrelated incident in July of 2017. He pleaded guilty to abduction by force or intimidation in June 2018 and received a 10-year sentence. This just showed investigators that this worthless individual was definitely capable of taking Heather's life. Since that time, the investigation has continued yielding additional evidence of Jordan's involvement in Heather's disappearance and her demise, although her body has not yet been located. In April of 2022, 49-year-old Paul Revens Jordan was indicted by a grand jury for taking Heather's life and concealing her body. The Franklin County Sheriff's Office said this in a statement, "who have worked diligently over the past 10 years on this case to bring justice and provide closure to Ms. Hajes' family and loved ones. Heather's disappearance has always been an active investigation and has never been considered a cold case," the statement added. Heather's sister, Crystal Songer, said, "There's never been any doubt in my mind that it was him." Over the past decade, Songer said she's fiercely advocated for justice on her sister's behalf. "If she was still here today, this would have happened to somebody else. Just say, she would be standing right here beside me ready to fight just as hard as I am," she added. No further information was immediately released by law enforcement regarding what specifics led to the indictment. Jordan is currently being held at Green Rock Correctional Center. He had been previously expected to be released in February of 2025. 35-year-old Jeanie Childs lived in Minneapolis, Minnesota in 1993. She was a sex worker. On June 13th, neighbors from an adjacent unit in Jeanie's apartment complex complained of bloody water leaking from Jeanie's residence. Her body was then found in the bathroom shower. She had been stabbed 65 times, mostly around her neck and torso area. Investigators found male DNA on Jeanie's comforter, bathroom towel, and bathroom sink. other than the DNA that investigators could not do a lot with because DNA technology was not that advanced back in 1993. Investigators did not have much to go on. Police called it a horribly difficult case to crack with so few leads and no witnesses at all. In 2018, officials reopened Jeannie's case. The break investigators needed soon followed in 2019, when police matched the DNA from the crime scene to 52-year-old Jerry Westrom with the use of genetic genealogy. He had not been previously a suspect in the case and was a married father of 2 adult children from Assentai, about 40 miles north of Minneapolis. Investigators discovered that he had lived in the Twin Cities area from 1991 to 1993 and had multiple contacts with law enforcement, including a 2016 conviction for solicitation. In 2019, investigators tailed Westrom to a hockey game where he ordered a hot dog from a concession stand. Investigators then collected one of Westrom's discarded napkins and obtained his DNA, which was determined to match the DNA found at the crime scene. He was arrested shortly thereafter. He long denied having contact with Jeanie or any other women in all of Minneapolis, claiming to have no idea why his DNA was found at the crime scene. In 2022, his trial started. On August 25, 2022, 56-year-old Jerry Arnold Westrom was found guilty by a Hennepin County jury for taking the life of Jeanie Childs. Westrom is expected to appear for formal sentencing hearing in the next few weeks, and it's expected that he will be handed a life sentence. Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman said, "My condolences go out to the victim and her family. They have had to live without justice for nearly 3 decades. I hope this brings some sense of closure to them. Today's guilty verdicts show that we will pursue convictions for serious crimes even if it takes years to gather evidence." Jeannie's mother, Betty Eichmann, was in the courtroom when Westrom was found guilty. This is what she had to say. "I know that the law is finally going to take care of him for what he did, and I hope he can sleep at night." Jeannie was a wonderful person. Even though she had problems, she had a big heart. In 2002, 23-year-old Cheryl Taylor lived in Weldon, North Carolina. She was married to John Olsby, her high school sweetheart. They had a 7-year-old daughter named Justice. On the morning of August 16, 2002, Justice woke up and realized that Cheryl had not woken her up in time for the school bus and she missed it. She went to her mom's bedroom, and it was there that she discovered that someone had taken Cheryl's life. An autopsy showed that she had been strangled and presumably assaulted. It was not made public if there were signs of forced entry or if investigators were able to collect forensic evidence from the crime scene that belonged to the perpetrator. Despite an extensive investigation by authorities, no arrests were made and the case went cold. Justice and John grieved together for 17 more years. Tragically again, by December 2019, after going missing, John Osby was found fatally shot and rolled up in a blanket near Sycamore Street in Weldon. Investigators were unable to track down the person that shot him, and for years the family was left wondering if they would ever get answers to what happened to John and Cheryl Taylor. That changed when Sheriff Tyree Davis hired Detective Sergeant Rich Summergy as Halifax County's dedicated cold case investigator in January 2023. His job was to pore over the office's unsolved cold cases, looking for anything that investigators may have missed in the past, and using new technology to find clues that were out of reach before. Detective Rich Summergy first looked into John Osby's case, before realizing Cheryl's life had been taken by someone years earlier. He identified the person responsible for what happened to Cheryl. Finally, on July 21, 2023, 46-year-old Lewis Turner Jr. was arrested and charged with taking Cheryl Taylor's life. He was living in Northampton County, North Carolina. It is not known yet if he is responsible for shooting John Osby. It was revealed that Turner was a friend of Cheryl and her family back in 2002 when he took her life. Turner was 25 years old when the crime took place. He has 2 other criminal charges on his record: assaults from when he was a teen. In both of those cases, he got probation. After being arrested and charged with voluntary manslaughter, Turner was held at the Halifax County Jail under $250,000 bond. Scott Hall, patrol captain of the Halifax County Sheriff's Office, outlined the reasoning behind the voluntary manslaughter charge. This was not a premeditated crime with malice. Based on the facts of the case and elements of the crime, we charged accordingly. Sheriff Tyree Davis remarked how he cried tears of joy at being able to arrest a suspect in connection with Cheryl's case. I received the call that we were able to solve one of our cold cases. A cold case from over 20 years ago. No one knew about this information and we could not say anything until we notified the family first. However, I was instantly overcome with emotion and tears started to flow. As a member of the state commission, I was sitting up front with the other board members and I tried to hold things together. I did so just by wiping the tears away. But once I started sniffling, I knew I needed to leave the room. Folks, I can tell you that these tears were tears of joy. These were tears of excitement. Excitement not only for Taylor's family, but also excitement for her friends, co-workers, schoolmates, and anyone that she had ever crossed paths with. I was excited for the community because this is a beacon of hope for all those families that need closure too. Cheryl's daughter, Justice Ausby, had this to say after the arrest. Unbelievable. We never knew this day was coming. Justice said she is grateful to everyone who helped bring Turner to justice and she is glad that she can finally have some closure. She said, "I am just so thankful for everyone that participated and helped me get closure for my family because today is a good day." In 2018, Sarah Ashley Hill, a mother of two who was 33 years old, was employed as a waiter at a neighborhood diner in Patrick County, Virginia. She was well known for her kind disposition, upbeat smile, and passion for dancing and music. She was very close to her sister, April, who frequently assisted her with her kids. Out of her 5 siblings, Sarah was the only one with the attractive red hair and vivid blue eyes. She used to get teased and told she was adopted by her siblings. Sarah was visiting her friends in North Carolina in June of 2018. She called April on her cell phone at 1:30 a.m. on June 6th, informing her that she was on Blue Hollow Road close to Mount Airy and that she would need a ride. Sarah did not give an explanation for her early morning walk. April was unable to simply leave her job, which was nearly an hour away. At Elkins Hugh Chatham Memorial Hospital, April worked as a registered nurse. Sarah Hill had vanished from view by the time the family got to Mount Airy. They assumed she had found another ride, or perhaps she had managed to get into her own vehicle, a white 2000 Ford Taurus. When April texted Sarah the following day to check on her and to ask if she still needed a ride, April received no response. When April called back, it went to voicemail. Sarah's phone had been switched off for 2 weeks. It was highly unusual for Sarah to be disconnected from everyone for so long. April claims that they spoke at least once a week, if not more frequently. April mentioned that Sarah had a lot of dubious friends and was dependent on illegal substances. April pondered whether it had anything to do with her sister going missing. Sarah was officially declared missing 1 month after her last sighting. Investigators began looking into her disappearance right away. Her white Ford Taurus was soon sighted at a shop close to the intersection of Blue Hollow Road and North Carolina 89. It was captured on camera footage that the store owner obtained while attempting to apprehend shoplifters. Sarah was, however, not named among the people suspected of misconduct there. Upon searching the vehicle, the police discovered Sarah's handbag, phone keys, and a few personal belongings inside. Nevertheless, no DNA fingerprints or other identifying marks that may have connected someone to her disappearance were discovered. The police thought of every scenario in which Sarah might have vanished. They looked into any enemies or issues she might have had with anyone who could have hurt her. They looked to see if she was burdened with debt or other financial issues that might have caused her to elope. Investigators also investigated whether she had a history of substance abuse or mental illness, which could have influenced her behavior or judgment. They looked into any romantic relationships or domestic conflicts she may have had that could have resulted in aggression or jealousy. They did not, however, discover any proof to back up any of these theories. 3 separate properties on King Park Circle in Mount Airy, North Carolina, were among the many locations the Surry County Sheriff's Office checked during the investigation that began in January 2019. After following Sarah's last known movements, detectives surmised that she was in the neighboring Stokes County, where she had been hanging out with a man. This person of interest displayed suspicious behavior, including restricting entry into his residence. It was found that the man had faced assault charges in the past. The Asbury Road property in Stokes County, North Carolina, where Sarah was last seen at the time of her disappearance, was shown to detectives in 2022. The Surry County Sheriff's Office, the Stokes County Sheriff's Office, and the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation carried out the execution of a search warrant for the property located at 1791 Asbury Road, Westfield, North Carolina on Monday, October 17, 2022. Investigators brought in specialist personnel to use heavy machinery to stabilize an existing structure and move dirt and terrain. Beneath the floorboards were human remains. Atrium Health Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center received the remains. After an autopsy on October 20, 2022, it was determined that Sarah Ashley Hill's remains were what was found. The Stokes County Sheriff's Office announced on October 11, 2023, that Leroy Hoover had been detained and charged with killing Sarah. Hoover is presently awaiting trial while being held without bond in the Stokes County Jail. In Stokes County, he is also involved in other cases. We can only imagine how difficult this has been for the family of Miss Hill, Sheriff Joey Lemons remarked. The detectives working on this case from the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, the Patrick County Sheriff's Office, the Surry County Sheriff's Office, and the Stokes County Sheriff's Office did an amazing job and never gave up. While nothing can truly bring a loved one back, we can only hope that this gives Miss Hill's family some sense of closure. The Durhams, a well-respected family in North Carolina, were brutally murdered in their own home on a gloomy, snowy night on February 3, 1972. The community was filled with anxiety and uneasiness as the case went unsolved for more than 50 years, leaving many to wonder who could have committed such a horrific act. In this world, there are certain mysteries that appear to be covered in shadows. They're mysteries kept from curious minds and prying eyes. After more than 50 years, the triple homicide case was finally solved by investigators in 2022. Is there any evidence connecting this case to organized crime? How did the police crack this case? The stunning city of Boone, North Carolina, is the setting for today's case. It is a charming mountain town in the northwest of the state, tucked away in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. It is a well-liked location for those who enjoy the outdoors and the natural world. The Appalachian State University, located in Boone, infuses the community with a youthful vitality. In addition to the many outdoor activities available in the area, such as hiking, biking, skiing, and more, visitors can explore the charming downtown area, which is home to numerous unique stores, eateries, and galleries. Boone is a fascinating place in North Carolina because of its stunning natural surroundings, fascinating history, and dynamic culture. On November 12, 1926, Bartex Bryce Durham, the son of Coy M. Durham and Collie Devon Crabb Durham, was born in the lovely state of North Carolina. He was a multi-talented and experienced man who led a purposeful life. Growing up, Bryce's siblings, Ralph L. Durham and Gail Durham Malden, played a significant role in his life. After completing his studies in history and physical education at Appalachian State University in 1941, Bryce Durham taught for a year at Wilkes County's Mount Pleasant School. However, his career path diverged and he ran the Mount Ariata Loan and Sales Finance Company for 6 years prior to moving to Boone. Prior to that, he worked for 13 years at the Home Finance Company, where he acquired invaluable business and financial knowledge. Despite having a diverse professional background, Bryce Durham was a devoted member of the Boone community, up until this tragic and premature death in 1972. Bryce's wife, Virginia Durham, who was born on October 24, 1927, was the daughter of Calvin M. Church and Virginia Lucina Eller Church. She was one of 5 siblings, and the other 4 were Winnie Levine Church Elliott, Dasha Church, Dovey Pierce Church Baker, and Rena Moju Bumgarner Walsh, who were all integral parts of her life. As she grew up in 1951, Bryce and Virginia got married, and later that year, Virginia gave birth to a baby girl and they named their daughter Jenny Sue Durham. On May 2, 1953, they were blessed with a son and gave him the name Bobby Joe Durham. They were a loving and tight-knit family. Jenny Sue was later married to the love of her life, Troy Hall. Nestled in the mountainous terrain of Boone, North Carolina, the Durham family had found their heaven. After moving from Wilkes to Mount Airy, the family of 3 decided to start afresh and settled in Boone in 1969. Their residence, 187 Clyde Townsend Road, was perched atop a steep driveway just off the 105 Bidas. Jenny Sue Hall and her husband were only 4 miles away. For the Durhams, it was the ideal location, a haven from the daily grind. In the quaint town of Boone, North Carolina, on the wintry evening of February 3, 1972, the weather was unforgiving. The Durham family took cover from the bitter cold in their Clyde Townsend Road home as the freezing air whipped through the trees, sending snowflakes swirling in a frantic dance. Only a year before, Bryce Durham, a Buick dealership owner, and his wife, Virginia, a librarian, had moved to Boone from Mount Airy. Bobby, their son, was a first-year student at Appalachian State. The family was well known for their diligence, quiet demeanor, and love of solitude. But something dark was simmering within, even as the wind howled outside. Something terrible was about to happen that would rock Boone to its foundations. The Durham family had no idea that their lives would soon alter irrevocably. On February 3, 1972, a dreadful tragedy befell Bryce, Virginia, and their son Bobby as they were at home on a snowy night. The Hall family was happy and peaceful as they settled into their split-level house, but their tranquility was abruptly disturbed by a terrifying phone call. The panicked voice of Virginia Durham on the other end of the line made it clear how serious the situation was. She was whispering to her son-in-law, Justin Troy Hall, about multiple intruders breaking into her house. However, the call ended abruptly before anyone could understand it, leaving Hall to wonder if it was all just a cruel joke. Hall was skeptical about the call's legitimacy, but his wife Jeanie was frantic for her family's safety. They hastily moved toward the car, which was refusing to start. They were unable to reach the Durham's home on foot due to the hazardous road up to it. Fortunately, Cecil Small, a private investigator and neighbor, agreed to drive them up there. Hall went inside with their neighbor Cecil, while Jenny stayed in the car. Inside the house, they discovered a chaotic scene. The sound of running water filled the air, and the house had been looted, but the real horror of the situation became apparent as they made their way to the ground floor bathroom. Bryce, Bobby, and Virginia Durham lay motionless and fully clothed in the bathtub, their heads submerged and the water running. The phone line had been ripped from the wall, leaving the house strangely silent. With no other options, Hall called the authorities from the neighbor's apartment around 11 p.m. to investigate the gruesome scene in front of them. In a matter of minutes, a swarm of law enforcement officers arrived, their flashing lights cutting through the darkness of the snowy night. Investigators entered the Durham home and scanned the once tidy interior, which now appeared to have been ripped apart by a tornado. Drawers were pulled out, clothing was strewn across the floor, and pictures were hung at odd angles or lying shattered on the ground. Closets had been ransacked and furniture had been knocked over, as if the perpetrators were searching for something in a frenzy. The officer's gaze then fell on the torn sofa set, where the Durhams had been relaxing with a late-night snack while watching their favorite TV show. The sight of the chaos and violence gave them a sinking feeling in the pit of their stomachs, knowing they were in for a long and arduous investigation. The television was still flickering, showing 3 half-full glasses and plates of half-eaten food that had been left abandoned on a coffee table. Additionally, they observed something strange on the kitchen table, a baked chicken that had partially been consumed, suggesting that the crime occurred while the Durham family was having dinner together. Initially, it seemed like a straightforward heist gone wrong, but the discovery of unclaimed valuables sparked concerns. An undisturbed money bag filled to the brim with cash proved that the horrible crime was not motivated by robbery. The agents from the State Bureau of Investigation in North Carolina realized they needed to move quickly. The bodies were carefully moved to Chapel Hill so an autopsy could be performed. The outcome was disappointing, but not unexpected. The state medical examiner, Dr. Paige Hudson, verified the reason behind the Durham family's death. The 2 men had been strangled and drowned, and Virginia had died from strangulation. Determined to learn the truth about the Hanes killings, Agents from the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation stormed the Durham residence as the investigation into the murders of the Durham family got underway. They searched every square inch of the house with diligence and precision, meticulously cataloging each clue and piece of evidence they came across. The team expanded as the investigation progressed, reaching 7 or 8 agents by Saturday morning, but that was just the start. 2 highly qualified physicists from the State Crime Laboratory were brought in to help them try to solve the mysteries surrounding the crime. They arrived in Boone on Saturday night and got to work. They labored for hours, sifting through the evidence, connecting the dots and solving the mysteries surrounding the Durham murders. As the investigation progressed, witnesses came forward with crucial information. Just after 10:30 p.m. on that fateful night, an eyewitness saw the green and white SUV leaving the Durham residence. However, the vehicle vanished in an instant. The North Carolina Highway Patrol found the SUV abandoned on the side of the road after looking for it for a few miles. The doors were securely shut. The engine was still running and the windshield wipers were scraping the snow. The investigators discovered that the SUV had been the murderer's getaway vehicle. Later on, it was found that Bryce Durham had taken the SUV out of this dealership in order to drive home during the hazardous weather. A bag of silver that was most likely taken from the Durham home was discovered by the police when they were searching the car. It was a crucial clue, and the investigators were hoping it would help them find the people who committed this horrible crime. The Durham murder investigation was a difficult voyage through speculative and suspicious waters. There were numerous turns and turns along the lengthy and convoluted list of potential suspects. Among those under investigation by authorities was Bryce and Virginia Durham's estranged son-in-law, Justin Troy Hall. A group of Asheville men also came under investigation. They were charged and arrested in relation to the killings, but were later released because there was insufficient evidence. Due to the accuracy of the knots used to bind the victims, there were persistent rumors and whispers of a contract killing. However, leads grew chilly as time passed. Despite the tireless efforts of the Watonga County Sheriff's Department, Boone Police Department, and North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, the trail became increasingly unreliable with every day that went by. It appeared as though there would always be unanswered questions regarding this heinous crime. The Durham triple murder case was unsolved for more than 45 years, with investigators finding it difficult to piece together the clues and leads drying up. However, in 2019, a glimmer of hope appeared following the conversation between a man named Shane Bird and a Georgia sheriff's deputy. Billy Sunday Bird, a suspected killer who passed away in prison in 2017 while serving a life sentence for 3 murders he committed in the 1970s, was the father of Shane Bird. While assisting Phil Hudgens with research for a future book, Shane Bird revealed an astonishing anecdote his father had told him while visiting him in prison. A murderous and chaotic tale set in North Carolina's snow-capped mountains, Burt claimed that his father had confessed to killing 3 people in a strong snowstorm and had escaped capture just in time. The White County Sheriff's Office was shocked by the news and promptly contacted their Watauga County Sheriff's Office counterparts to relay the details. This discussion gave rise to fresh hope for justice for the victims and their families, as well as a reopened investigation into the Durham murders. Justice's wheels never stopped turning, and in the Durham murder case they turned slowly, but in the direction of the truth. Finding Billy Wayne Davis, a known associate of Billy Bird, who was already serving a license in Georgia for his prior crimes, took little time for investigators after they started following new leads. Over the course of 2 years, the Sheriff's Department held 3 separate sessions in September 2019, October 2020, and August 2021. Each session included a critical piece of information that helped identify the perpetrator of the horrible crimes. The truth was ultimately revealed as a result of the evidence from these interviews and 2 additional sources being corroborated. The investigators were able to piece together a startling connection to a case from across state lines by carefully gathering evidence and cross-referencing it. The Dixie Mafia, a loosely organized criminal organization that had terrorized the Southeast with its violent crimes in the 1960s and 1970s, was at the center of the Fleming case of 1973. Names started to surface connecting this case to the Durham murders, which shared similar circumstances. Officials claimed that Billy Wayne Davis, an 81-year-old inmate at a Georgia prison in Augusta, is the last living member of the infamous Dixie Mafia. He has been incarcerated since 1986 and is presently serving a life sentence for murder at the Augusta State Medical Prison in Georgia. Investigators claim he divulged information regarding a hired hit in the mountains of North Carolina that went wrong during a severe snowfall. Davis acknowledged that he drove the group away after the Durham family was killed, saying that Charles David Reed, Bobby Jean Gaddis, and Billy's son, Debert, were the ones who went inside the house on that fateful night. Davis declined to provide any further details about them. Justice may never be fully served, even with the Durham family murder case breaking new ground in 2022. It is unlikely that charges will be brought for the killings because 3 of the 4 suspects have already passed away. It is unlikely that the 4th suspect, 81-year-old Billy Wayne Davis, will be released from prison anytime soon. He is presently serving a life sentence in a Georgia prison. For the families of the victims who have been waiting for answers for 5 long decades, the prospect of justice being served may amount to nothing more than a pipe dream. The fact that the people who ordered the hit are still unidentified adds to the tragedy of this unsolved case. The unanswered question of why their loved ones were targeted could follow the surviving family members into the afterlife. Chris Lotz, special agent in charge of the Northwestern District of the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, commended the hard work of all the experts and members of the community who have given their contributions to the case over the years. The only surviving member of the Durham family, Jeanie Durham, was overflowing with gratitude as she thanked the committed people who put in countless hours to crack the 50-year-old cold case of her family at the 2022 press conference. She expressed her gratitude to the investigators for giving up numerous days and weekends in order to crack the case. Jeanie Durham was particularly appreciative of Watauga County Sheriff Len Hagerman for his unwavering dedication to providing her family with closure. She also thanked Charles Whitman, a retired special agent for the State Bureau of Investigation, who kept working on the case after retirement. Wade Calvert, a special agent with the State Bureau of Investigation, and Carolyn Johnson, captain of investigations for the Watauga County Sheriff's Office. Their unwavering friendship and dedication meant the world to Jeanie Durham, giving her hope during her challenging years. The Watauga County Sheriff's Office expressed gratitude for everyone's efforts in helping to find answers for the Durham family and acknowledged the many people who have contributed to wrapping up the case. It became a personal obsession for former North Carolina Attorney General Rufus Edmiston. It crushed his heart to see Bryce Durham's mother die without receiving justice when he met with her. She had pleaded with him to track down the murderers. Edmiston had been frustrated for years that he was unable to solve the mystery of the mountains on his own, but he is now relieved that the case has been resolved for him by Sheriff Hagamond and his team. He thanked the investigators who made it happen and said it was a huge relief. Shane Bird, the son of one of the offenders, wishes to express regret to each and every victim of his father, Billy Sunday Burt. The case may have taken 50 years to solve, but everyone involved demonstrated dedication and commitment to justice, which is a testament to their perseverance. Shane, despite his father's murderous nature and the dozens of people he killed, is not trying to cover up his horrific act. Rather, he wants to bring closure to as many people as possible. Even though there is not complete closure, it is somewhat relieving that the case has been resolved after 50 years, and it gives hope that future generations will be able to sleep well knowing that justice has, if only partially, been served. This case takes us to the southern city of Kalamazoo in the state of Michigan, 6300 Proctor Avenue in Comstock Township, home to 22-year-old Christopher Neal, his wife Haley Coe, and their 2-year-old daughter Charlotte. The couple had recently learned that Haley was pregnant with their second child and were so excited to start telling people and see their family grow. Everyone said that Christopher and Haley were a perfect match from the beginning, both caring, hardworking, good listeners, and very much focused on everybody else being happy. Christopher's father said his son never had trouble walking into a room, even if he didn't know anyone. Within the first 2 or 3 minutes, he'd be sharing life stories with someone. He was just that type of guy. He genuinely cared for others. After finishing high school in North Texas, Christopher became a volunteer firefighter and then joined the Navy. Haley was a young Navy recruit too, and the pair had met on a beach in Florida. 2 weeks later, he asked her out on a date. Haley politely said, "No thank you," something the couple laughed about for years after. More time passed, and when Haley needed help with her studies for the Navy, Christopher offered to tutor her. They went on their first date shortly after, and Haley said they were inseparable from that point on. The couple soon eloped, and after this, their baby girl Charlotte was born. When Haley found out she was pregnant again, the pair were over the moon, and had even started making plans to adopt children after this, providing children in need with a loving home they knew they could give. The couple were often apart due to their time in the Navy, but always made family their priority. Christopher would often write Haley letters and leave messages on her phone while she was sleeping, so that when she unlocked it, she found them later. His friends said he was a hopeless romantic and always let his family know they were on his mind, wherever he was in the world. The young couple were often taking photos and sharing them on social media. It really was clear to see just how much they were in love, how much they adored Charlotte, and how precious being together as a family was to them. A year or so later, having finished their duties, they were both granted terminal leave from the U.S. Navy, and in 2019, Chris started a new job in real estate. The family moved to Michigan and started living in Haley's parents' house while they worked on their new dream home. Beautiful home that had actually belonged to Haley's grandmother. Christopher spent most days renovating it, and they couldn't wait to settle in. The family finally moved in on November 17th, and everything seemed to be going great. Christopher was excited about his new job and what this could offer. It was nearly Christmas, and they were finally together as a family with a second baby on the way. With so much joy in the young couple's lives, it's hard to fathom what happened less than 2 weeks later. December 1st, 2019. It was a typical evening in 6300 Proctor Avenue. Everyone had finished their dinner. Charlotte was sound asleep in the other room, and Christopher and Haley settled in for a night of watching television. Suddenly, at 10 p.m., there were several loud bangs on the front door. As most will agree, 10 p.m. is usually quite an alarming time to get a knock at the door, unless otherwise expected, so the couple were instantly hesitant. Christopher jumped up to see what was going on. Little did the pair know, a man had opened their screen and interior door and was already inside their home, looking around. The man was 35-year-old William Paul Jones, and he was armed with 2 handguns. According to Haley, everything went from 1 to 10 in a matter of seconds. As soon as Christopher saw him, he knew the situation was bad and tried to get his wife and daughter upstairs, moving them around the house, trying to get into a room where they could at least lock the door. Christopher then called 911. There was a scuffle between the pair as William tried to get Christopher into another room, which he refused to do. A SWAT team and negotiators had already been dispatched and were starting to gather outside on the street. The operator began explaining to William that she had officers there that were ready and willing to help him, but he needed to put the guns down and let the family go outside. Christopher remained calm and collected, assuring William he understood where he was coming from, and trying to calm him down and reassure him. The line was then transferred to the officers and negotiators outside. William answered the phone with a list of demands, one of which was the police were not to enter the house. William then hung up the phone, and the officer tried to ring back. Upstairs, panicking and fearful, Haley tried to make a quiet 911 call herself. The situation was escalating, and police slowly started entering the house, before announcing themselves and continuing the negotiations from the hallway. Neighbors could now hear screaming and shouting and were trying to get hold of police too. Some of the officers who were still outside then called Christopher's phone back, which was answered by William. Although Christopher was still alive at that point, a few moments later shots rang out inside the house, and body cam footage captured officers running into the rooms. William jumped out of the bedroom window before officers pinned him down on the front porch. The entire ordeal lasted about 40 minutes in total. As William was taken away, officers found Haley and Charlotte hiding upstairs. "Is my husband alive?" Haley asked. Officers had to deliver the devastating news. 22-year-old Christopher Neal was dead. William had also opened fire as the SWAT team came in, hitting 3 officers as he was trying to escape. Fortunately, the officers survived and made full recoveries. As he had jumped straight through a pane of glass, he was taken into hospital to be checked over. Doctors noted he seemed intoxicated, but he was so resistant, it was undetermined what, if anything, was in his system. He wasn't making sense and was rambling about aliens, claiming he didn't know the date, time, or place. It took deputies and hospital security to restrain him as he got more violent and aggressive. Witnesses later told police William often smoked meth before going on long, violent rampages, shooting at cars and breaking into homes. It turned out that William had an extensive criminal record and had spent most of his life going in and out of prison. He had actually been released just 5 days before he killed Christopher. Over the years, he had been arrested and jailed, many times for many things, including burglary and home invasion, driving without a license, firearms charges, assault, resisting and obstructing police officers, and fraud, to name a few. When he was calm, Willie and Paul Jones was charged with 19 felony counts, including the murder of Christopher, and his bail was flatly denied. As news began to spread about what had happened, everybody was in a mutual state of shock and disbelief. Neighbors said it was a sobering realization that no matter how safe and quiet their little street and area always felt, this was proof that it simply wasn't. As per Christopher's wishes, there was no funeral held, but friends and family gathered to remember and celebrate his life. His friends remembered him as a goofball, someone that had a thirst for life and a sincere devotion to those he loved. In court, William's obstructive and difficult behavior continued, but his attorney actually advised him to plead not guilty and pushed for a psychiatric evaluation of his client. An extensive evaluation was carried out by the Michigan Center for Forensic Psychiatry, and all everybody could do was wait. William Paul Jones was deemed competent and fit to stand trial. It remains unknown as to why all this transpired that night and why William did what he did. He didn't know Christopher and Haley, and there was absolutely no link or motive that anyone could find. It was seemingly completely random. In court, William said he was sorry for what had happened and told jurors it was the worst he had ever felt in his life, but the prosecution weren't buying it. They argued this was completely premeditated and said, if Haley and Chris had 40 minutes to think about whether the defendant will choose for Chris to live or die, the defendant had the same. At any point during that time, he could have stopped what he was doing, but he chose not to. And this was deliberate and calculated decision. It took jurors just 3 hours to find William Paul Jones guilty of 18 out of the 19 felonies, including 1 count of first-degree murder. In July 2022, the judge said, "There are good people and bad people in the world, and what you did on that day was pure evil," adding there was no reason for him to ever get out of prison. Haley gave a statement and said, "I cried myself to sleep every night for 6 months after Chris died. I'm so broken that living feels like too much. Dealing with the trauma does not make me strong. It reminds me of the card I've been dealt. I can no longer handle simple pleasures such as fireworks on July 4th, or any day for that matter, because as soon as I hear loud bangs, it brings me back to hiding in that upstairs bedroom in my family home, fearing for my life and my family's." She added that William had snatched away all her dreams, one of which was to be old, wrinkly, and cranky in a home together. She said her heart was broken when their daughter Charlotte tearfully told her, "Some days I just want to die already so I can be with Daddy." The devastation caused by what happened that December night is hard to fathom, and the loss of Christopher has been so widely felt. Haley later gave birth to their son, and he was named after his father. Haley's dad Jack said, "He's the reason my daughter and granddaughter are still here. He sacrificed himself to let his wife and daughter get away. He got them out of the situation, and he's a hero for that. He saved them." Christopher's love for his family and his instincts to protect them at all costs is as admirable as it is utterly heartbreaking. He was a hero until the very end. August 1st, 2010, a 000 call was made from Mount Druitt in Western Sydney. A little girl was missing. Her mother had tucked her into bed the night before, and by the next morning, she had vanished. The caller was Christy Abrahams, the mother of the missing child, Kaisha. As police descended on the scene, they knew they had to act fast, as the first few hours of a child being reported missing are critical. They needed to speak to as many people as possible to put together a timeline of Kaisha's last known movements and try and narrow down leads as quickly as possible. Christy was no longer with Kaisha's biological father, Chris Whippet, so officers headed over to speak to him. At around 10:45 that morning, they talked with Chris, who said he had been at home with his mother before heading out to get a tattoo. Christy's best friend and neighbor, Allison Anderson, was desperate to help, and so she asked Christy if she had any suspects in mind. Allison would later say she said of Whippet, the effing so-and-so, he had rode past the unit a week or so ago and did a gun sign with his fingers to Rob, who was hanging up the washing. She told Christy she needed to tell this to the police, but Christy wouldn't. Rob was Christy's partner, and she said that he had been out searching for her since they discovered she was missing, to try and generate leads and also find Kaisha if she had simply left the unit and wandered off. A major search was conducted by police and volunteers. They scoured bushland, parks, and reserves, hoping that it would lead them to the little girl. The fast-moving operation continued to gain momentum, and Strike Force Yarisun was formed. The police discovered that Kaisha hadn't been to school or been seen by anyone else since early July. The officer in charge, Detective Inspector Russell Oxford, said the last time she had been seen by immediate family was around the 7th of that month. She had been reported missing on the 1st of August. The 3 weeks in between were vital in putting together a timeline of events. 2 days after the call to emergency services was made, Christy and Robert made appeals for any news of her whereabouts and for anyone with information to come forward. Those in the community were desperate to find Kaisha and bring her home. Candlelit vigils were held and flowers and toys were laid out for the missing child. On the 30th of August, it was reported that Kaisha's father, Chris, was being questioned by the police. He was adamant that although he had been paying child maintenance, he hadn't seen Kaisha in years and had not had regular contact with her since he and Christy had separated. He was adamant he had nothing to do with her disappearance. Police said that they had received new information that he had allegedly been seen near the Woodstock Avenue block on the morning she went missing. Chris had been in hospital for the previous 3 weeks after complications from diabetes. Meant he had to major foot surgery. His mother, Liz, said, "I'm furious." She said that her son had not been kept up to date with the information about Kaisha's case. "It has been 28 days. We have no idea what is going on. The police tell us nothing. Then they show up here saying this." But there was something that was standing out to the police. What had initially appeared as a desperate mother and stepfather awaiting any news soon began to raise eyebrows. The behavior of Christy and Robert stood out to many as unusual. Neither of them had made any effort to join in the searches, and despite the fact her daughter was missing, life for Christy seemed to resume as normal. She would go and get her hair and nails done and go shopping. Her appearances in the media only aroused more suspicion. The pair were adamant that they were innocent, and their friend and neighbor, Allison Anderson, became the spokeswoman for them and would defend them against the rumors that had begun to swirl. Allison gave a statement on their behalf saying, "The family wished to deny the recent allegations in the media. The family encouraged the public to come forward with any information that may assist police to find Kaisha, but please stop making baseless allegations. The family wished to be left alone to deal with the situation. You put yourself in their shoes. You couldn't imagine. And that's why this is the time when they need their friends and support and family." There was soon more controversy surrounding Kaisha's case. As the investigation continued to be carried out, and Christy moved into a local motel, Allison agreed to help them move to their new property in Kings Langley. When they went into the unit, one of Kaisha's jumpers was lying on the floor. Christy said that the police had told her that there would be nothing belonging to Kaisha there before she kicked the jumper away and began swearing. When Allison went into Kaisha's room, there was nothing there. No possessions or toys. The forensics team descended on the unit they had lived in with Kaisha. Something disturbing was revealed. Blood belonging to the missing child was found in every room. Christy Abrahams was brought in for an interview. Over the following weeks and months, the community continued to hold onto the hope that she was still alive. But this would soon come crashing down. 22nd, 2011. Huge announcement was made. 2 people had been taken into custody on suspicion of the murder of Kaisha, none other than Christy Abrahams and Robert Smith. This arrest was the culmination of months of an intricate and complex undercover operation. An undercover officer would get close to Christy in the hope she would reveal what had happened to Kaisha. At a motel, the undercover officer met with her, and in order to win Christie's trust, the officer told her he needed to know the truth and that he could help her move the body. Christy Abrahams would finally confess. She said that Kaisha had been refusing to put her pajamas on, and in response, Christy gave her what she called a nudge with her foot. This resulted in Kaisha falling, hitting her head against the bed. She said Kaisha's body was like jelly, but said that she did respond when Christy had asked her to squeeze her finger. She said, "And then she went funny, and then I put her in the shower to try and wake her up. She just started making weird noises. We thought it would go away, we really did." She stated that when she had checked on her the next morning, she wasn't breathing, but she didn't get her medical help. When describing how they had disposed of her body, she said, "He put petrol on her and branches on her." Smith and Abrahams then took the undercover officer to the deposition site. It was here that the search for Kaisha came to a devastating end. Her little body was found in bushland near Shelby, in Sydney's west. At 1:12 a.m., Abrahams and Smith were both arrested in a laneway near their home. They were then charged. It would have been Kaisha's 7th birthday. For those officers who had been watching the couple for months, it was a bitter end to a tragic case. A candlelit vigil had been planned for Kaisha's birthday, and hundreds turned up to pay their respects, many voicing their anger and disgust at how things had panned out. One card read, "Happy birthday, Kaisha. You deserved a better life here, in your time on Earth." At 2 o'clock on Good Friday, police informed Kaisha's grandmother, Liz, that Abrahams and Smith had been arrested. This devastating news sent shockwaves throughout Kaisha's family and the local community. The little girl they had helped look for, prayed for, and kept in their hearts was gone. In September 2011, Kaisha's private funeral was held. Before the funeral, Chris said, "I want Kaisha to leave this earth knowing how much she was loved, and I want her put to rest the way she deserves." They also requested that mourners wear Kaisha's favorite color, purple. Abrahams and Smith had both put in requests to be able to attend the funeral, but Chris said hell would freeze over before he would let that happen, adding, "My family are ones left to deal with all of this and arrange the best send-off for Kaisha that she deserves. And I'm telling you, they are not coming." Their requests to attend were denied. On the 28th of September 2011, a public memorial was held for Kaisha. Many questions needed to be answered, one of them being, how had this tragedy unfolded? When the truth was revealed, it would leave people outraged. Christie's early life had been marred by domestic violence. She had both witnessed and been subjected to violence at the hands of her father. Her mother had epilepsy, and when she was 10 years old, she heard her mother having a seizure. She was alone with her little brother, who was just 3 years old. When she went to help her mother, she had tragically died from the seizure. Her father didn't want custody of his children. So, following this, she and her younger brother were put into foster care and spent time in various group homes. As a young teenager, she was examined by a psychologist who determined that due to an intellectual disability, she needed to be with an appropriate family who could provide her with the correct emotional support, and by the age of 16, she was in a girls' refuge. When she was 19 years old, she met Chris Whippet through his brother Matthew, and a romantic relationship quickly formed. Not long after, Christy was pregnant. Soon into her pregnancy, Chris had found Christy punching her stomach following an argument between the pair. Things seemed to simmer down for a while, and the pregnancy continued. On the 6th of February 2003, she gave birth to their son, Aiden. Community services officers visited the house and found nothing seemingly untoward with Aiden, apart from Christy giving him 1 scoop of formula instead of 2. After another fight between the pair, the police were called. Chris said, "I'm Aiden's dad. His mom's not coping and she mixes her medication. She threw my clothes and stereo off the balcony last night and threw a lit candle at me while she had Aiden in her arms. The wax went everywhere and nearly burnt him. She's up all night with Aiden and has threatened to throw him off the balcony if he doesn't shut up and let her sleep. I don't know what to do." Christy refused to open the door to the officer, but after talking to a community services worker, the officer believed that Aiden would be removed that night. But this didn't happen. Just 6 weeks later, tragedy would strike. March 22, 2003. Chris's mother Liz saw her son arriving at the house on his bike. The news he had was horrifying. He told her, "Aiden's blue and he's dead and he's cold." Christy's up there screaming and screaming. "Mom, I found him and he was on his face." Liz went straight to the unit and found Christy holding Aiden, screaming that he was cold and to get another blanket. He was taken to hospital, but there was nothing that could be done. Little Aiden had died. The post-mortem found no signs of abuse, and his cause of death was unascertained. Just over 1 year later, Christy gave birth to their second child in April 2004, a little girl, Kaisha. Pair began arguing again. She told Chris that it was over and he needed to leave for good. As he packed his things, followed him, and they carried on rowing. Kaisha was just 15 months old at the time and started crawling towards the couple. Chris said Christy stormed towards Kaisha and picked her up by the neck before carrying her through to the living room and dumping her on the sofa. Kaisha began to crawl off again. Christy responded by picking her up and biting her on the shoulder, leaving Kaisha screaming in pain. Chris immediately called the police. Kaisha was taken to the hospital and Christy would be convicted and given a 12-month good behavior bond. Chris was originally given custody of Kaisha. However, the Department of Community Services, now the Department of Family and Community Services, put Kaisha into foster care. On the 15th of October 2006, Christy was arrested for having outstanding warrants for driving without a license. Just 2 months later, and after taking part in anger management counseling, Kaisha was returned to her. A year later, Christy was pregnant again with a second daughter. During a hospital visit, a nurse saw a bruise on Kaisha's face and reported it. The caseworker spoke with Kaisha the following day, and Kaisha could not explain how it had happened. There was also a cigarette burn on her body, and she said, "Mom hit there, Mom did that." But no further action was taken. Kaisha lived in such a state of fear. Her mother raising her arm in conversation would cause her to flinch. At this point, Christy was in a new relationship with a man called Robert Smith. By June 2010, Christy was pregnant for a 4th time. Christy called her father, someone at the center of much of her unhappiness, and asked him to take Aisha. She told him, "I'm sick of her. I will hurt her. I really will hurt her. I will kill her." Liz, Chris's mother, didn't even know Kaisha was back living with Christy until the police arrived at her house saying the little girl was missing and they needed to search the property. Over the course of her life, several reports had been made by family members and neighbors regarding injuries on Kaisha. Education officials also made various trips to the home as Kaisha had only been to school 4 times in her whole life. And when she had gone, teachers had reported seeing bruises on her head and face. Between January and July 2010, truant officers made 7 trips to the home, but each time the door was locked and they got no answer. They then informed Christy that they would be taking legal action against her regarding Kaisha's school attendance. Allison said the last time she had seen her was on July 11th at around 4:30 in the afternoon. Kaisha was in the car and Christy was stood outside smoking. Allison would later say, Kaisha asked if she could hop out of the car. Christy said, "No, UFNG can't. Shut up and sit in the car." That was the last time I heard or saw Kaisha. As the initial investigation began, the behavior of Abraham and Smith stood out. When looking back at the press appeals, Liz, Chris's mother, said, "A lot of flashbacks come into your head. I'd seen it before with Aiden. That's why I knew something was going on. It wasn't tears when Kaisha was missing. I'd seen it before. There was no inquest held into Aiden's death. But after Kaisha was killed, a senior official said there probably should have been one. And following their arrests, Detective Inspector Russell Oxford said they would consider reopening the investigation into Aiden's death. Abrahams and Smith then went about attempting to destroy any evidence they thought could link them to Kaisha's death. They took things out of the property and threw away shoes and clothes, along with the SIM cards from their phones. In order to maintain the image that Kaisha was loved and cared for, and that they hoped she was still alive, they went out and brought children's toys and a Tinkerbell poster for when she came home. Forensic pathologist Dr. Matthew Ord had carried out the examination of Kaisha's remains. She had fractures to her teeth and 10 different injuries to her body and head. Her jawbone had been broken in 2 places. Dr. Ord said, These types of injuries are mainly found in children who have suffered severe, prolonged physical abuse, adding they would have left her in considerable pain. Following her death, her mother and stepfather kept her little body in a suitcase. After several days, they burned her body and buried her in a shallow grave. They threw away the hammer used to dig the grave and also burned the suitcase her body had been kept in. After this, they got a taxi home. In late November 2012, more tragedy would strike. Chris, Kaisha's father, passed away suddenly. He was found by his mother and he had been suffering from various health issues, including diabetes, and had also been battling substance abuse. He went to bed and then didn't wake up. Before court proceedings began, Allison Anderson went to see Abrahams in prison. She asked her former friend why she had lied throughout the investigation and left people wondering for months where Kaisha was. The first thing for Christy to say to her former friend was, "Have you seen Robs? What are you doing here?" Allison asked why Christy had used her and lied to her and why if she was struggling to cope. She hadn't given Kaisha to a family member or her to look after. Allison then shouted at her, "You rot in jail, you filthy pig, kid killer." She then took her shirt off to reveal a purple shirt with a voice for Kaisha written on it, something she would later wear throughout the trial. Allison said the only response from Abrahams was, "Use rot in hell." Abrahams also blew a kiss at her. The prison guards had to pull Allison away and she was subsequently banned from going back to the prison for life. She decided against visiting Robert Smith, saying it wouldn't achieve anything or give people the answers they needed. July 18, 2013. As the police van pulled up at the Sydney Supreme Court, there were angry reactions from members of the public, with people chasing the van and shouting. The courtroom was packed. Abrahams turned her back on the public gallery and looked only in the direction of the judge. On the first day of her trial, Christy Abrahams entered a plea of guilty to the murder of her daughter after the Crown had previously rejected her plea of manslaughter. Christy Abrahams was sentenced to serve at least 16 years, with a maximum of 22.5 years in prison for murder and interfering with a corpse. As her sentence was handed down by Justice Ian Harrison, she showed no reaction. Cries from the public gallery could be heard. Justice Harrison said, "The trust placed between a parent and child is of the highest and utmost importance." Abrahams caused the death of Kaisha with the infliction of a violent, lethal force on what was a vulnerable and defenseless child in her care, who is entitled to expect and receive her attention. Justice Harrison found that while she hadn't intended to take Kaisha's life, she had meant to cause grievous bodily harm. He also said that he could not be sure beyond a reasonable doubt who was responsible for the other injuries that Kaisha had sustained prior to her death. He rejected her account of what had happened, but said that the evidence could not adequately explain exactly what had happened. He noted that Christy Abrahams had been abused as a child and said that what had happened to Kaisha was the inevitable product of entire intergenerational failures, adding, "The death of the deceased is the foreseeable and predictable consequence of preventable cyclic abuse. The offender's failures are mirrored in the failures of others." Justice Harrison did find beyond a reasonable doubt that she had recklessly failed to look after Kaisha after she had become injured, which amounted to reckless indifference to human life. Robert Smith was tried separately. On the 3rd of May 2013, he was sentenced to a minimum of 12 years for manslaughter and being an accessory to murder. Christy Abrahams will be eligible for parole in 2027. For her former friend, Allison Anderson, the sentence wasn't good enough. She said, "It's just horrifying knowing she can be out when she's 46. Does having a bad upbringing and abuse give you the right to go and take people's lives? She knew what she was doing. It's just a cop-out." Kaisha was killed by a cold-blooded murderer. The knock-on effect of Kaisha's case was huge. So many people had been betrayed, lied to, and left broken. They hoped that they would be able to bring Kaisha home and put all of their efforts into making this happen. One person who was particularly affected was Allison Anderson. While she had had her own concerns from the beginning of the investigation, she had desperately wanted to believe that her friend had nothing to do with whatever had happened to Kaisha. Now faced with the realization that she had been lied to the entire time, it was an incredibly painful and devastating thing to come to terms with. Allison had also been in foster care as a child and experienced abuse, meaning that this was incredibly personal to her. She would later go on to become a qualified youth worker and use her skills to help those who were vulnerable and in need, so more children don't fall through the cracks. Childhood should be a time of innocence, wonder, and joy, but for little Kaisha Whippet, it was a time of torment, fear, and pain. She should have been able to grow up in a happy and safe environment, free from abuse and free to flourish and grow. Those who loved her are determined that she will never ever be forgotten, that she will always be loved. Kaisha's headstone reads, "You are not just a memory or part of our past. You're part of our family as long as it lasts." Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.